5 days after having my neck broken and being paralyzed, I'm walking. It wasn't lost on me that just the gravity of that situation, the blessing that it was. So damned if I'm not going to make the most of this second chance.
A broken neck ended Marc Stcherbina's professional rugby career, but it couldn't slow him down. With his second chance, he's brought his passion, experience, and drive to the broadcast booth, as well as the boardroom, where he's a tireless advocate for emotional intelligence. I've had the opportunity to hang out with Marc in Austin and to partner with him on our Difficult Conversations course. He is one of the most inspirational people I know. I hope you have the chance to meet him yourself, and you can learn more about him at winningeq.com. I'm Carl Tischler from the HPNA Academy. This is the Better for Having Met Them podcast. Thanks for tuning in.
One of the things that we talk about in the Academy is we define career in a different sense than the usual thing of just a job, etc. We think about it as a sort of 60-year block of time, God willing, obviously, in terms of health. And one of the tools we have is a mural where you sort of diagram kind of where you've been to date since you started working and kind of where you think you're heading out there. And we thought, just to kind of kick us off here, Marc, if you could just give us a sense at the high level of kind of what your 60-year arc looks like and what the sort of origin story was before then also.
Sure. Yeah. 60 years. Wow. And there's multiple careers in that, and there may be more. We'll see. But my first career, if you will, professional career, was playing rugby, as you mentioned, for 12 years. Still can't believe I lasted that long. I was born and raised in Sydney. Started my sporting career there. Played a number of sports, but I seemed to gravitate toward rugby, especially as we played rugby union. Those of you who know Australian sports, there's a distinction. There's rugby league and rugby union. So I played both. But when I went to Sydney Boys High School, it was specifically rugby union. And I stayed with it. I saw the opportunities that rugby union had to offer beyond just a potential professional career, but travel. There was culturally, it just seemed to offer a lot more than rugby league. And I stuck with it. I also juggled that with college, with the university. I studied sports science, got a diploma in education while I was playing professional rugby. And this is dating me now. I still remember faxing one of my assignments back from South Africa while I was on tour to the university to get my assignment in. Good times. So, and I'm glad I did that. And then continued to play professional, traveled around. I left Sydney in 2002 to pursue a contract in France, in Biarritz. Very fortunate to have been offered that, not just because of the rugby on offer, but the cultural experience. I got to learn a new language, live in a beautiful part of the world. And that continued in Europe. I took a deal then in England and then ended up in Wales. So playing professional rugby the whole time until that all came crashing down, you could say, in a career-ending injury in 2000 and the end of 2008, where I broke my neck. And that was the last game of contact rugby. I was going to say professional rugby. My last game of rugby ever was that game. And then obviously had to figure out what was next. So 2009, and that was, no doubt we're going to dive into that. But what an interesting period of my life that 1 to 2 year transition was. And I still believe I'm transitioning in a way, but really have found my purpose since that moment. But it was challenging, obviously, to figure out, if I'm not a rugby player anymore, who am I and what am I going to do to make a living? So that led me on a personal development journey, obviously, in that moment, having to figure who I was, had to figure that out and just get through that initial trauma of breaking my neck. I was paralyzed from the neck down during the incident. So it was a life-defining moment. I can still connect to that moment to this day. I have video footage of the injury. And I'll explain how that was one of the biggest blessings of my life, that injury. Obviously, I was able to walk again, which helps. I made a miraculous recovery, walked out of hospital 5 days after a spinal fusion. surgery, C4 and C5. I had the disc removed from between those two fractured discs and replaced with a chunk of my own hip and a metal plate and screws. And then it took a good year to recover fully from that because I had extensive nerve damage in one arm because of the nature of the fracture on my spine and how it pinched my spinal cord and where it pinched my spinal cord. And in that period, it was tough. It was challenging, still living in the UK and trying to figure out what was next. And I made the decision, I mentioned this to you, Carl, but I made the decision, which today I'm still quite proud of, where I think a lot of people fear the lack of security that might come with the next step or what they're transitioning into. If I'm not getting paid well from rugby anymore, where am I going to maybe get paid the same, have the same kind of lifestyle? There was so much uncertainty with what was next. That's where I had to really go within and learn about self-awareness, leadership, and that personal development to really get a grasp of how I wanted to make the most of this second chance at life. Because that's really how I felt. 5 days after having my neck broken and being paralyzed, I'm walking. It wasn't lost on me that just the gravity of that situation, the blessing that it was. So damned if I'm not going to make the most of this second chance. So in order to figure that out, how am I going to make the most of this second chance? I had to look at how I'd been living, not just how I want to experience this next phase of life, but who I need to be to show up to experience it that way. Have a look at my values, not just write a to-do list or a bucket list on places I wanted to visit and things I wanted to experience and accomplish. But who do I want to be as a human now? And I know that contributes to my definition of happiness. So in that process, all right, how do I want to experience life? Well, I don't want to be in the UK because it is raining, it is miserable, it is grey. I'm only really here because of this job that I had, which was kicking and passing a rugby ball around. And I don't have to do that anymore. So why would I be here if this now doesn't make me happy? So why don't we choose that first? Where is one of the most sunny places in the world that I've experienced and I've visited often? Los Angeles, California, Southern California. So I chose geography first. I didn't have a job out there, didn't know what I was going to do out there, but I just knew that if I start from a place of I wake up every day smiling, happy because it's sunny, from there, I'm in a good position to create. And the energy, and you can just see if you've ever been to LA, those of you who are watching and listening, you will know that there is a certain energy out there that is, well, it just, people are constantly moving. It's a big health and fitness culture out there as well. And that seemed like maybe a logical progression for me with my background in sports science, with my professional rugby experience and background. Well, I can just maybe start with coaching other people in personal training, and that's what I did. And then it just, through the people that I met, the connections that I made, the community that I built around me, certain individuals really took me under their wing. And one of them had an e-commerce company that he'd started up with a couple of other founders and needed some help with leadership. I was interested in leadership. Part of my personal development journey was all about leadership. I'd been coached by some of the greatest leaders in sports globally. So I had enough confidence and I think enough knowledge to be able to support my friend who brought me in, which essentially gave me my first experience as a corporate coach. And to this day, I still work for that company. That was 8 years ago. And built more experience and confidence in executive coaching, corporate coaching, delivering workshops, and started being referred to other companies who then referred me to other companies and so on. And here we are, started a business called Winning EQ. EQ meaning emotional intelligence, because that is very much the core of my coaching and my teaching is helping leaders develop their emotional intelligence so they can become better leaders, they can care for the people in their charge better, and they can create a culture within their organization, a winning culture based on caring for their people and themselves, which I know you're a big advocate for with the O of self, right? Which is obviously how we were connected, because somebody thought it'd be, there are a lot of synergies and be a good idea that we met. So here we are.
Just going back on what you were saying. So there are often these people in our lives, if we're really fortunate, and kind of this is the idea of the podcast also. There are these people that are like the right person at the right time, putting themselves out, making a suggestion, having a kind word, giving us a chance, or just, as I say, just connecting us out there. And so in our case, James Godfrey connected us. He is the great connector, as a student and mutual friend of his. And, it's a great example. You just really feel blessed. And it sounds like, Mark, what you were talking about that friend giving you that chance at that moment. I mean, I can only imagine how significant that felt, as to have someone put that kind of faith in you. Must have really meant a lot at the time.
Oh, it did. To this day, it does. We're very good friends. I consider him a mentor and someone that I can go to where I need more support, especially in the world of business. I had no idea about business and corporate life. Embarrassingly, I've never had a real job in my life, Carl. So, a corporate job, if you will.
Right.
And that, well, in that regard, like 9 to 5, seriously, I left university to pursue a professional sports career, which is anything but 9 to 5. And, that was actually part of when I go back to how do I want to experience life? And I extend this in my coaching. When I coach people, I take a holistic approach to my coaching. What I mean by that is I'm not just trying to help people become better high performers. I'm encouraging them to look at their lives and make sure they're enjoying their life, make sure that they're creating balance in their life. And yes, high performance is just part of that, but it's not everything. And if we put too much into the pursuit of excellence and high performance status, everything that comes with that, then we have a tendency to sacrifice other really important areas of our life that can enhance our life experience. So that's what I mean by holistic life experience. Work is just part of it. And that was, for me, important, that it was going to be an even tougher transition if I went from what I'd experienced, which is a different schedule every day as a rugby player. Monday is different to Tuesday. Wednesday, you're tapering off some of the high intensity volume of work that you're doing during the season. That's just during the season. We have seasons in rugby. And then Thursday, we have a day off. So I'm probably playing golf and focusing on the weekend. Friday is a light day because it's all preparation. It's more mental than physical. And then it's game day. I don't know anything really, apart from maybe being with you on this virtual stage on a podcast, that replicates the experience of game day for a professional athlete. Nothing like it, unless you're a rock star and you're playing in a stadium and you've been building up to it all week. So that was part of the tough transition. And I know a lot of athletes struggle with that have played or competed at a high level. Where do I get that? And can I accept that I'll never get that like it was? There might be similar substitutes, but really be grateful that's gone. Those days are gone. Let's think about what's next. So what I didn't want to do is just go straight from, I really enjoyed that flexible schedule, variable schedule. Well, what kind of career, what kind of work can I do that somewhat mimics that? I value flexibility in work. And that's where working for yourself is the obvious choice. Unless you you work for a company and work for a boss where you are able to choose your own hours. I don't know too many that do, but there are. But really, if you want to do that, you got to be your own boss. And that comes with its own challenges and uncertainty. But what I stuck with was, this is the kind of experience, this is the kind of day that I want to have. Not clock in at the same time, clock out at the same time every day. I didn't used to do that. And I loved my job as a professional athlete for that reason. So what can I do that somewhat gives me the same experience? And here we are today, and knowing that being a contractor, and that's where I need mentors that are doing the same thing, that can help me start my business. What does it look like? Grow the business. And that requires me being humble, having humility, putting my ego aside and like, all right, I'm a complete amateur and rookie at this. And that's okay. It's an important part of my journey, because that's what I started doing as well. When I'm like, okay, what's my purpose? What's my passion? Let's start with that. And then the career will just figure itself out, rather than let's take that finance job because I know in 2 years it'll pay me the same kind of money I was getting paid in rugby. And then I can buy the fancy cars and live in the expensive neighborhood and whatnot. Some people have done that and they are miserable.
We see that a lot. And I think we talk a lot about how intentionality and structure are kind of your best friends. And as you've been talking about that tremendous level of intentionality you had about location and the type of work and the structure of work, that's not something that comes easily, I think, for anyone making a transition. Just a question about that. Did you feel that coming to LA for the sunshine in LA and all the other reasons, that would be an easier place to sort of remake yourself into this, as opposed to, for instance, going back to Sydney?
That's a really good question, because I did consider yes and no. Yes, for the reasons I outlined. It is a place where it's very outdoor orientated, and there's a lot of energy and entrepreneurial energy, hustle, if you will, but also relaxation. And it just seemed like a good place to practice balance and not have, you just had all walks of life in LA. It's a big city, and there is opportunity. However, where I think Sydney would have been easier is, again, contacts.
Yeah.
I still was somewhat relevant in Australia. I've got networks back there that I've kept in touch with. I mean, I got high school buddies that we're still very good friends, and a lot of them have done very well in business, that I could probably just call if I was at a pinch and I needed a job. I could call one of them and he'd bring me in and I could work for them. Or my old rugby networks, my rugby teams, I could potentially get a position in one of those. I was actually headhunted for a position at my old rugby team in Sydney while living over here. So I said no, because I waited up. I did think about it, but that would mean moving back there and a whole change of lifestyle, and just didn't feel ready for that. So yes, and that was hard to turn my back on. That was hard to turn. My family's out there. So friends, family, networks that still exist. Moving to LA, I was creating all of that from scratch, which can be scary. In fact, Carl, I nearly left LA because after about a year of living there, I did find it kind of like a big lonely city, and living in the wrong area of town. I was dating a woman at the time and was sort of hanging out with her friends, but it's very transient, LA. People come, people go.
Yeah.
Not a lot of that sense of community, that's the longevity of community. Until one day I basically said, talk about putting your pride aside. I was like, I need friends. I got to stop just relying on my then girlfriend's friend group, which was quite concentrated. Not everyone's available for me. I feel like a bit of a loser. I feel lonely. I got to make friends. So I went on Facebook, and there's that section that says groups. Yeah, there's meetups on Facebook. Someone told me about this, and I'm like, all right, what kind of group do I want to meet up with? And this is probably the first time that I had tapped back into my rugby background, because I admittedly had turned my back on it because I just wanted a break from rugby and I wanted to reinvent myself. I had some issues around rugby and the way my career ended. So but it was time to say, all right, well, I can't turn my back on who I was. This could be a good way to connect and relate with people. Let's type in rugby Los Angeles and see what happens. And there's this a social pickup game group of guys and gals that play on Santa Monica Beach on Sunday mornings, called the Beach Box, because it's South Africans started it. There's Australians, there's expats. And I showed up. I got the bus. I didn't have a car at the time. I showed up down at the beach one day, didn't know anybody. I'd reached out to someone on Facebook. They told me where and when to be, and met that person, and then just kind of got thrown in, and then started making friends that way. And one of those friends was Sean Lippman, the man who brought me into his company. Another one of those is my best friend to this day. We lived together for 4 years. There's a handful of guys in that community that have in some way shaped my experience here in the United States. And quite frankly, kept me in LA for sure, that group of guys that I play beach touch rugby with. So we can lead into how important community is. My point is, talk about intentionality, Carl. I needed to get off my ass and go and make friends, which was a shock to the system, because when I realized it, playing professional rugby, every new city I moved to play rugby, there's an instant built-in friend group of 30 to 40 men and their partners and their friends. And it was never a problem making friends playing rugby, no matter where I live. That camaraderie is very strong, very deep when you're playing a contact sport. So I didn't have that anymore. So it's definitely a new experience for me, but I also needed to do that. I needed to learn how to go out and make friends. There we are.
Those of us, let's just call us civilians, meaning we didn't play professional sports. When you think about the courage to go and do that versus like the courage to stand in front of a 300-pound guy running at you, obviously they're different types, but I personally kind of think that the first one of reaching out, being humble, admitting you need friends, it's not a competition, but I would say the first one feels even more courageous. But how do you think about that courage and the role of that as between playing professional sports and just navigating life?
You're spot on. It for me, it can be even scarier. And we've talked about this, you and I, but when you talk about playing rugby, standing in front of a 300-pound human, normally from the Pacific Islands, running at full speed with the intention of injuring me and dominating me physically so that it can contribute to winning the game. This is happening constantly, and not just game day, in practice as well, at training. So my body's taking a beating, but that was not as much of a problem. I did not feel as courageous because, you get injured, bones heal, muscles heal, bruises heal, but the emotional vulnerability, putting yourself in front of potential emotional harm and injury, for me anyway, was way scarier. And when I compare the two, I had no problem. Just put me in, coach, suit me up, and I'll just throw my body, I'll throw my body on the line because it's just my body. Even as we say that, however, if I make a mistake and I get criticized by my peers, supporters, that hurts more. So I had to actually learn how to be better at and be braver in that regard. And you're right, moving to a new city, there's potential rejection that might happen and lack of belonging, and how that can emotionally be painful is, I think, the reason why a lot of people stay where they're familiar, stay in their comfort zone, if you will.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
However, Carl, remember, I'm going back now to when I decided I was going to live this second chance of my life,
Right.
fullest and with intention. Whenever I found myself gravitating toward what's familiar and what doesn't feel as emotionally scary, like meeting new friends and potentially not being accepted by them and being rejected, I just remind myself, is this making the most of your second chance at life? Things are going to be scary and you're going to have to push through them. And what's on the other side of it is what we're focusing on, because that means, and even being proud of yourself for putting yourself in front of that danger and seeing what's on the other side, for me, contributes to happiness, contributes to me having a positive life experience. So we got to put ourselves in front of potential emotional danger, emotional harm. Does that answer your question?
Right. Right.
Yeah.
It does. It's like the emotional equivalent of the 300-pound guy running at you full steam on practice and on the match.
Yeah.
I know you have a really good set kind of morning structure of the habits and stuff that you go through. Could you talk a bit about that, how you've developed that, how it helps you and serves you in the second chance?
Yes, great. Thanks for asking. I think it's so important. And I've learned for myself increasingly how important it is, and also seeing the benefits of doing a morning routine versus not doing a morning routine for a number of reasons. Routine develops habits. When we get good at developing habits, it takes discipline to develop habits. It takes sacrifice to develop habits. And when we develop habits somewhere, there's a good chance we'll be able to develop habits elsewhere. That's the process of habit and routine is important with a morning routine. Doing it in the morning, I found, just helps activate me for the day. When I run through my routine, which is about an hour, and I make sure that I have some movement in there, I have mindfulness, which is just a meditation practice. I use Headspace. Just download the app, 10 to 15 minutes every day. With that, I journal, and it's a gratitude journal, which again is an intentional practice. That has changed my life for a number of reasons. So that goes in the morning routine. Hydrate. So we're looking at physiological, we're looking at emotional, we're looking at mental, and then physical as well. With, it could just be 10 reps of something, but I like to go for a walk. I'm not training intensely in the morning yet. Again, my work hours allow me to take my time, and I can train in the afternoon a little bit more intensely. So I gently get myself into the day with a 30-minute walk in nature. I chose a place in the city of Austin, which is right by trees and a trail and water, for that reason. So I get up, I go out on that trail, and I'm surrounded by nature immediately. I meditate and journal 10 things I'm grateful for. And we can talk about that if you want. We can dive into that, because I think that's a misunderstood practice and a very important one. And then at the end of that hour, I'm ready to go. I feel like I've lived half a day, and it's not even 9 a.m. And obviously the earlier I get up, then I can have that done by 6:37 a.m. So conversely, I notice how my day ends up and how it looks if I haven't done my morning routine. And that'll happen. Sometimes I travel, I might have a late night for whatever reason, and in the morning I'm a little slower to get going, or I have to get up and get straight on a call, and then that happens, and we got to allow for that. However, for the majority of time, the intentionality of a morning routine is a game changer. What's your morning routine, Carl?
Well, it's not as structured as yours, but I definitely also believe in it. It does just set you up so well for it. And I definitely agree. It's a tool that we teach in the academy called the Habit Garden, where we get people to just visualize what some of their core constructive habits are, and just to visualize them in terms of like how developed they are, or are they, growing? Are they atrophying, et cetera? It's a little visualization, because I totally agree with you. Given how important habits are, they deserve, like vegetables, right, to be dealt with professionally and in a perimeter, like we deal with a vegetable garden, which is how we got to the habit garden. So I'm going to call it here first. One of the best TED Talks that you haven't yet heard, because it hasn't come out yet, but it's going to, is Marc's talk, which I always think of it as being titled, "I broke my neck so you don't have to." So question mark would be, obviously for those, again, we're talking about civilians or just people that have never, come close to either the intensity of professional sports or to something as incredibly frightening and disruptive as you experienced in your life. How do you sort of get people to think about making the most of their, experiences and kind of creating a second chance for themselves?
What a question. What a question. That's what I asked myself, and that's how the TED Talk was developed. How can I help people create the moment that I had, or similar? I'm just repeating what you said, but in my words, without needing to break their neck, to realize how lucky they are that they've got this life that is. I stared losing my arms and legs and sitting in a wheelchair the rest of my life in the face for 25 minutes. I was imagining my life ending as I knew it. And like I said to you, I have that to connect to whenever I find myself reverting to old programming and patterning that we develop as children. We're conditioned in certain ways, and some of the ways that we're conditioned serve us for the way we're trying to live and the things we're trying to achieve, and other tendencies don't serve us. So it's understanding that we can start to work on those areas that might be standing in our way. But I don't want people to have to break their neck to have that realization, to have that constant connection I'm able to have to the fragility of life, how it's important to be making the most of every minute. So what would I suggest people do that could give them a similar sense of urgency and intentionality with their life? And there's a number of different ways. In fact, sometimes my conditioning and my programming is so strong, as I mentioned, that just remembering that I nearly died and nearly became a quadriplegic isn't strong enough. I need other reminders. So I encourage people to practice the other reminders that I introduce into my routine and my day-to-day. And that is, quite frankly, just thinking about death. Reminding ourselves that we are going to die. And some people get the shivers when they just think of that and think it might be a little bit morbid and macabre. What I learned in my personal development journey, I read a lot of books, I started my own podcast during the pandemic, as I think most people did. And I actually had a guest on, Hansa Bergwall, his name was. He was living in New York at the time, but he spent a year or two with monks. He wanted to deepen his meditation practice. So he went to the motherland, and he went to Bhutan, and he learned that these particular monks would not just meditate, but they would do death meditation. And they would do it 5 times a day. At various times of the day, they'd space it out. They would imagine their decomposing body. They would imagine how and when they were going to die, so that they could be more and more comfortable with that and not living in a way that is avoidant of that. because I think a lot of us develop habits and show up in a way that we don't think we're going to die one day. We think it's so far in the future that we can procrastinate, or we can really deliberate and just not do that thing until it feels right. And it could come tomorrow. And I think the more we think about it, it makes them a happier race of people. So they do death meditation to improve their happiness in the present moment, because they're not scared of dying now, and they're reminding themselves that it's going to happen. So what am I doing in the present moment to make sure that I'm living now? Because there's going to be a day where I'm not. And Hansa, developed an app called We Croak. I thought it was brilliant. I mean, I came across him on another podcast and had to invite him on mine talking about this. And it does exactly that. It reminds you 5 times a day that you're going to die. It says, don't forget, you're going to die. It sounds silly. It makes me laugh. But at the same time, doing it regularly, seeing that and thinking about it, helps me, again, become comfortable with this fact of life. And furthermore, it has me think again, all right, well, knowing that, thanks for the reminder, what am I doing in this moment? What have I done so far today? Am I proud of what I've done? Am I putting something off? Yes, you are. Stop procrastinating. Make the call, right? Or do the thing. And it does it.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. I know it sounds morbid and heavy, but I think definitely that used kind of in the right way, if I can put it that way, that death infuses life. And I always find inspiring going onto Marc's website, which is winningeq.com. You see a picture of Marc being on the ground and carried off on the stretcher on that, which is a heavy thing. And, you asked about morning rituals. I also believe a lot in visuals. I have a little, basically like a PowerPoint presentation to myself I look at every day. And one of those slides is the section of the cemetery where my family is buried. And I don't see that as morbid. Quite the contrary. I see that as a kick in the ass to life. And all of this, including our conversation and just thinking about the connectivity of it right now, which is today's the 23rd of June, 2025. We're just getting to the end of the push-up challenge in Australia, which our mutual friends, Troy Stanley and Sterlo and James are all doing, which is to raise awareness about mental health, and particularly about suicide, and particularly about suicide for men, and particularly for suicide of men of a certain age, which is there. And I'll tell you, when I was a kid, I remember we going to this, like a sort of a family camp type of thing. And I'm probably dating myself when I say this, but one of the instructors had this shirt that was like the sort of in thing at the time that said "choose life" on it. I was a kid, like maybe 8 years old or something. But for whatever reason, that always stuck in my head, that saying. But I never understood until later in life that actually it is a choice. And it's a choice that we make every day, and that tragically some don't make. And having also, lost people to that, again, there's a sense of mission and purpose and just desire to say, that, say, death infuses life. This is it. This is your chance to do it. There's some cultures where they believe that you are partially dead while you're asleep, and that in waking up, it's not just like, hey, you have some entitlement to the day. In fact, I'm pretty sure if you look at just about anything out there, there's nothing written that says you have an entitlement to this day. And so if you wake up with the thought that said, I'm glad I'm awake, but I'm not taking it for granted because I was partially dead and now I'm here. I think all of these things, put in the right context, obviously, can do a lot to give us a kick in the ass that we need. And I know one thing you and I have talked about a lot is that if you are a driven, empathetic person, and the HPNA does stand for high performing non-assholes, pardon my language. But if you're a driven, empathetic person, your life is challenging. It's really challenging, and it's not going to get unchallenging on its own. And it takes effort, and it takes, as you've talked so eloquently about, desire to want to keep getting better and to having habits and having keep just people around you and community. And I guess one question I have for you in that regard is, it sounds like rugby as a sport, is really like a true team sport. And that's a kind of key element. And do you feel now, sort of post rugby, when you think about friends and community, that kind of that experience of where you've come from and having that community is helpful, or how does it kind of stay with you today?
I mean, 100%, it's been helpful. It's shaped a lot of who I am. I've been able to experience, and it's taken some reflection, because we tend to take experiences for granted. I think back to what I was mentioning, when I found myself in LA without a rugby team around me that I'd been used to, that felt very unfamiliar and a new territory for me, but I had that to draw upon. I look at me, I typed in rugby in Facebook groups, Facebook meetup groups, as opposed to game nights or ultimate frisbee or surfing. It was rugby. I think on some subconscious level, now that you're asking me this question, it was because I'd experienced and knew the camaraderie that comes from, and listen, this isn't just to give rugby a plug, but it is important to notice, you mentioned our mutual friends and they'll say the same thing. Sterling Wardlock, James Godfrey, they got to experience not just what team sport gives you in terms of community, camaraderie, competition, a healthy outlook on life, sometimes an unhealthy outlook, depending on who your coaches are and what's around you. But for the most part, all those great characteristics of team sport, rugby is something extra special. I can't put my finger on it. It's just developed in a way where culturally the values of rugby give you a very good grounding for living life, living it well, living it conscious of community and doing good. And the values are it's just being a better human through playing that sport. Unlike any other sport I've experienced, particularly in America, not to kind of crap on the big sports here in America, but really the big sports, and you know what they are, for the most part lack what rugby has. And that's why anybody in America that stumbles across rugby and then gets to learn what rugby's actually all about and the values that rugby is built on, people just fall in love with it. And it triggers a part of it, connects with a part of them as a human and a person that is appealing. It's like, this is the kind of person I want to be and be around when I'm involved in this sport. So knowing that, back to your question, yes, I tapped back into that and it didn't disappoint. I went straight back into, these guys weren't professionals. Some of them have played professionally, 20 years. Some of them are older than me, so they get it. Some of them were at a decent club level that had skill. Regardless, everybody was connected through this sport and acted the same way and did our best to uphold those values. And it reconnected me with the sport of rugby. I then, to get a visa, I didn't mention this in my journey. Remember, I lived in America. I didn't have a visa, Carl. That's problematic. So it's not that I didn't get thrown out of the country. And I needed to get a visa, and to get a visa, I needed to base it on my former life as a rugby player. I got a P1 visa, which is based on my rugby skill and background, and to have a sponsor, if you will, to validate the visa, I had to do work in rugby. There wasn't a lot of work around, and I was recruited. I was asked to come and coach Santa Monica Rugby Club. So I thought I'd never have anything to do with rugby again after my injury, and I found myself back and enjoying it and like a renewed look. I think that was important for me now that we're talking about it, that I went back to rugby at that level, playing touch on the sand in Santa Monica where they filmed Baywatch with all ages and genders, and then coaching club rugby, not professional, right? These lads that were showing up to training, they were paying to play. And it just a whole new attitude around it. And it was, I'm glad I reconnected with it.
Right. Marc, you do a lot of great group work now professionally, whether that's, retreats in Montana or working with corporates. It seems like, again, in a rugby squad, you've got a lot of trust as like a basic kind of thing. How do you deliver a sense of trust and help build that in groups, that you're working with where you don't have, the history and whatever of rugby? It's just a group you pull together. What's kind of worked for you in making groups like that work so that people can be vulnerable?
Fantastic question. Like any group, I think what's important is to establish again and connect to why we're even there. So remind everyone of, we're a group. What are we doing here? What's our objective? If there's a performance element, all right, what are the goals? What are the outcomes that we're all moving toward together? So it's a reminder of, yes, there's individuals here, but we're contributing to a greater goal, bigger than ourselves. And what is that? What does that look like? Communication is key, transparency of communication. So building trust means communicating. And you'll soon find out if people are communicating honestly or not. So it goes without saying that it's honest communication and clear. That's where a lot of what I do, especially individually, Carl, is helping people learn how to communicate more effectively. Emotional intelligence is very much that. Self-awareness, so you become aware of how I'm not communicating effectively, what I need to do to practice so that people can hear my message more clearly. And again, tap in with your values. Like, were you honest when you just said that thing to your team member? Did you hold back? We've agreed that that's the other thing as well. With the goal and the objective, what are the principles around how we're going to achieve this thing? It's very elementary. I take it in those steps. Connect to our why. What is the how? What are the processes we're going to do? Remember, we're communicating. And let's all agree or align on the main principles that are going to help us achieve this. And the principles around how are we showing up daily so that we can achieve this thing we've all agreed and aligned to what we're trying to achieve. If we don't establish that from the outset, now you've got chaos. You've got people doing their own thing. You've got people in resistance to one another. There's a lack of cohesion, a lack of understanding. And not only are you not going to achieve the goals that you're all there to achieve, or the team or the collective goal, but it's not going to be a pleasant experience in the process. So there's conflicts going to arise. How do we handle conflict resolution? Accountability is important. People ask me about that. I actually do workshops on how to create an accountability culture. Same again. If you haven't established and aligned on the principles and the standards that we're trying to achieve in everything we do, and let's be specific about them, from what we wear to showing up on time or not, to how we communicate with one another. If any one of us is not showing up in that way, Well, we can hold each other accountable to that. If you haven't established those principles, how can you hold somebody accountable to a standard that you haven't discussed?
Right.
That you haven't clearly defined. I have an expectation of you showing up this way at all times. And you have that same expectation of me. Are we agreed? Yeah. Great. So when you're not showing up that way, I get to nudge you either gently or more intensely, and you get to do the same to me. Not enough teams or organizations are setting themselves up that way. They're just trying to figure it out.
Yeah. Why do you think more teams aren't? And it kind of seems crazy / counterintuitive, whatever you want to call it, that more teams, whether they're, teams of all types, right? Companies, et cetera, like don't embrace EQ as a pretty central part of it.
Yeah.
Why do you think that? Yeah. Why do you think that? I mean, that's a tough question. I know.
No,
why do you think that is?
It starts with leadership. It starts with the leaders. How does a team even form? For the most part, an individual or a couple of individuals come together with a goal, with an objective, to start a business, to provide a service, right? It starts small and then to scale. This is the world that we're talking about, I guess, right? Corporate. They have to add more people to that. They create teams.
Mm-hmm.
If that, or those leaders, and then the leaders that they employ as levels of leadership and management are created. If that leadership isn't constantly connected to what we just discussed, or even if their why is a little bit unsavory or built on greed or lack of ethics, then that's going to filter through the entire organization. And there we are. So in other words, you say, why? Well, a lot of the time, CEOs of companies or founders, they start something because they see dollar signs. They want to be rich. They want to have a certain lifestyle, and they're going to stop at nothing to build that for themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And that makes it then very hard for everybody else to kind of come together and connect to that. And their personality might be one that is very results driven, very type A, if you will. There's a number of different assessments that we could quote out there, Myers-Briggs, DISC, whatever it is that you use, sure, that helps determine, oh, you're this kind of person. And it's very analytical. It's very results task driven. Well, that means what they tend to not be is connected to building relationship with people, in having comfort and skills at connecting with humans, because they've abandoned that somewhat in their pursuit of goals, monetary gain, whatever it is. Not that there's anything wrong with that. But to your point, it's clearer and clearer for me to see when you look at why a culture of a company is lacking accountability, lacking empathy. You just got to look at their turnover. Is it just constantly people coming in and a year or two later they're out? Yeah. Right? Depending on the industry. But a lot of the time, research shows that the main reason people leave a job is because of a poor relationship with their boss and their manager.
It's astonishing. It's astonishing that it's that. It's really interesting.
Yeah, that's leadership.
Yeah.
That's why it fascinates me, and I call myself a leadership coach. But really, what I'm doing is helping organizations improve their culture, and the leadership levels is the target. That's what starts. Yeah. So, and it's tricky. It's hard. You might even have a founder and a CEO with the best of intentions, and they are culture led. Yes, we have this great product or service. It's going to change the world. We're going to have to build a team, and it might grow to be a massive company in the process. Great. But we need to be culture led, right? To make this great, we need to follow these principles. We need to drill it into everybody. We only hire people that are aligned or have the character that can pull this off. great. And as I've seen it happen, as their company grows and they add more people and they lose touch because now they're the CEO of 1,000 people or whatever, connectivity, communication starts to dissolve, then it gets harder and harder for them to maintain that culture.
Mm.
But some of the best countries, some of the best companies we've seen, the CEO sticks with it. One that comes to mind is Southwest Airlines, the late great Herb Kelleher.
Yeah.
Tens of thousands of employees, and he was tireless. He did not stop at letting everybody know, yes, we have a great airline, but it's great because of all of you. And he did his best to meet everybody, to write handwritten letters to everybody to show that he cared. It's just a great example of how a CEO, no matter how big the company got, still cared for his people, showed that, they felt that. And they were, I think at one stage, the only airline, especially after 9/11, to have not made any layoffs. The only airline. Because his people took a pay cut and did whatever it took to get through, because he'd spent time building relationships and showing his employees that they come first. Not the customer, they come first.
Right.
Yeah.
So speaking of culture, very fortunate and grateful to have Marc as an instructor on our Navigating Difficult Conversations at Work course, bringing really these kind of two key areas of expertise that he's so articulate on, one of leadership and team building and the other of his experience in there. Marc, one of the things that really stuck with me was we were talking about how in professional rugby, which is I think different than other sports, you're fired or hired every week during the season in terms of whether you make the team or not. And I know you talked about how people and managers, coaches, if you will, approach that situation can make such a huge difference in terms of people that approach that from a sort of human perspective and those that do it from a sort of inhuman perspective. It'd be great just to get your thoughts and what that look, what good and bad kind of look like in that and what the impact is on company or team culture.
No, of course. I love that you brought that up, because I think that's a perfect example of what we were talking about with what happens when you don't set those principles, goals, have effective communication, and your leaders of that team or organization are lacking in any of those areas. And you're right. I mean, I put it in that way. It's effectively, when you think about the way that a rugby team is selected every week for a new match, it's not always the same. And for various reasons. A lot of the time, especially if there's struggling with performance and cohesion, some players are going to get dropped. New players are going to get given a chance. And that's where I said to you, it felt like at times we were being hired for the next week because you can never feel secure in your position. And that's actually at that level. I think at any level, that's healthy to always be on your toes and know that you could be replaced this week if you drop in performance. But as you pointed out, I don't think in any other environment or industry is it as intense and frequent as something like a rugby team that has, 20 to 25 games in a season, and every week you're waiting to see if you're selected on the Thursday for the Saturday. You may or may not be. And in order to for that process to not lead into a poor culture of disgruntled players, keeping morale high, you need leaders, aka coaches, who are making those selections to be doing them in a way that shows integrity, that shows fairness, that shows clear and effective and honest communication. As you can imagine, I've had both. I've had the coach that didn't do that well, and it eventually bled into becoming a toxic culture.
Mm-hmm.
A culture where he was no longer trusted as a leader. And then there was a lack of kind of direction. There were players, there were other leaders that emerged, that there was a lack of order, and it would just turn into chaos because he was not very good at telling a player, I'm not selecting you this week. Easy to tell someone, you're in the team again, buddy. Well done. Love what you're doing. We all love giving people that feedback, don't we, folks?
Yeah.
It's easy. It's fun. It feels good. They smile. That's not going to happen with everyone. You're going to have to have a difficult conversation with someone and say, based on these reasons, you're not in the team. And there's ways to do it. There's ways to have that conversation that has the player being dropped feel like he's treated fairly, feels like he has all the information he needs, not just to reflect upon why, but what he can do better. I mean, that's important too. You're not in it this week. Here's what I need from you to get back in. Okay? It's clear. It sucks. The ego doesn't want to hear it, but you have to respect that coach. You know where you stand, and you're given the blueprint to improve.
Mm-hmm.
Versus you don't get told, you just read your name on the paper and wonder why, and then the coach doesn't talk to you, and now you're just showing up to practice with the reserve beer bong holding pads for the guys that are in the team, disillusioned, feeling unvalued. And after a while, if you're influential enough, and I've seen this happen too, and you're being treated that way and you're influential over other players, and you start to influence them.
Yeah.
You start to put your negative feelings toward that coach onto them, and you might even enroll them in thinking the same thing. Now we have division.
Right.
And that happened a lot. But with the coaches that were forthright and handled those situations well with respect and respected their players at the same time. And if that player still wanted to let his ego run him and be disgruntled and not try a training, because they normally got weeded out.
Yeah.
Because everybody else is like, no, we respect the coach. It's, this is a culture has been created where if you try and go against it because your ego doesn't like not being selected, then there's a good chance you're going to get spat out the back because of the solid culture that was, and you're the odd one out now. You don't fit.
Yeah. I've got a great term for that. I think it comes from the guy, Pat Lencioni from the Table Group. For that, the first of those, right, where it's dysfunctional, et cetera, it's equivalent to like you're in a meeting, but you're not being able to speak your part, et cetera. So they say meeting silence, corridor violence. Meaning you take that bad attitude and you do exactly what you just described. You go out and you're talking about it, and that is just that is an expressway to bad things. One of the things that's been so interesting putting together this course on navigating difficult work conversations is really just a sort of a simple observation that the number of times that we outside of rugby have to have a tough conversation at work, whether that's founders splitting or giving, tough feedback to someone, relatively speaking, it doesn't happen. It's not an everyday occurrence. It's low frequency, but when it happens, it's super high impact. And that was the thing that, one of the many things for me that learning more about professional athletes, and especially I think rugby, come to really appreciate is, your 20, 25 matches a year or less if it's an international, those are also low frequency, high impact, but you guys deal with that by practicing all the time. Whereas we our default on having a tough conversation is we never practice on it. It'd be great just to get your thoughts on kind of the value of practice, whether it's in rugby or outside of it.
Great point. I think I echo your words. I agree with you. You can look at, and I do, I'm fortunate to have had that experience in sport of going through the stages of learning a skill and performing that skill at a high level. And then, in fact, this is, now that we're talking about it, I think this is where athletes need to, they either struggle, they don't get it, and they need to realize that skills can be transferable into a different environment in a different way, such as, let's take the discipline that it takes, the patience that it takes to learn a skill over time and master it, and apply it to anything in life with the same approach, like having a difficult conversation. I think where people also fail to realize, what they fail to realize is that it is a skill. Communication, just like kicking a ball, just like hitting a golf ball or casting a fishing line in a river in Montana, fly fishing, like it requires patience and skill and tweaking that and trial and error. Well, same with having a conversation that is going to result in a better result with somebody else. This is, again, EQ and the cornerstone of EQ, and why I just, once I realized how important it is, and that what I've learned as an athlete, I can translate into developing emotional intelligence. I'm like, everybody needs this. Everybody needs this. I still need it. And it's neglected because I don't think people see emotional intelligence and the components of emotional intelligence as skills that can be developed, that need to be developed. So yes, same approach, having a conversation. If you feel anything you feel uncomfortable doing, you feel awkward doing, you don't think you're good at, practice. You can practice. There's many ways you can practice those things. And I don't think we have time to talk about that, or we
will. So we talked about a couple of exceptional people in your life. The friend of you that gave you that break, that's still a client 8 years later. Amazing. We talked about Herb from Southwest. When you think back, across your 60 years to date, are there any other people that sort of stand out as people that really inspired you or that taught you something?
Too many to mention. Too many. But it is important, I think. And there we go for everybody now that are watching and listening. I'm going to do it. It's important to reflect on that. Think about the people who have had that kind of impact. And the older you get, it's easy to forget. And so it's important to, I think, about that and why. And then if they're still with us, reach out to them and let them know. Again, that's practice. Totally. That's intentionality. Totally. That's practice acknowledging someone that you're grateful for. And I think you'll realize, and we have realized how good it feels when somebody gives us that feedback of how they've impacted, or you've impacted their life. It's so fulfilling, so satisfying. So
yeah. The funny thing about it, I did it when I turned 50. I made a list out exactly as you proposed. In fact, I wish I had your advice earlier. I wish I'd done it earlier in life, because I'm sure I've forgotten a lot about them. But I made this list of people that I considered teachers. And some of them, I have to tell you, were complete dickheads, but people nonetheless that I really learned from and that I realized I felt grateful to, right? Because actually learned something for it. But
Mm.
it's interesting on that list. I think about a number of people where it just was a kind word at the right time when they didn't have to, and when actually, it really mattered,
Yeah.
that made a difference. Or I remember once, there was the whole problem working with banks. For a bank, there's infinite ongoing, redundancy rounds, etc. And
Mm-hmm.
eventually it's more or less your turn, no matter how good you are. There's always a time. But I remember, for instance, when it was my turn, and ironically, it turned out to be really good for my career because of what happened next. But I remember there's a guy, I'll just call him Stan, which was his first name, who I didn't really work with all that much. And I knew he was another American expat. And he just sent me I don't know, it would have been an email, I guess, at that time, just a 2-second email. And it just made a difference.
Yeah.
It really did. So, I think, as you alluded to before, Mark, the kind of irony, I think, is that the forces that are against what you and I both do are the forces that look at things like EQ, or the idea that a kind word can make a difference, or the idea that actually tactical self-compassion is a high performance thing, not a low performance thing. We're up against the forces that look at that and say, well, that's bullshit and that's low performance. And it's just, you just shake your head at it, right? Because I think it's completely the opposite.
I agree. And the benefits aren't immediately obvious. I think that's the problem as well. When high performance is linked to metrics that you can easily see and compare, and dollar value and stock price, and even just productivity throughout a day that leads to the bottom line. What's not considered often is, as you mentioned, and it's funny because they call them soft skills, whereas here we are saying difficult conversations it's difficult. It's not soft or easy. It's hard. But it's crucial. It's crucial. Like, it's ironic that somebody be so driven and results focused, lack the emotional intelligence to motivate and make the people that are helping them achieve those results feel valued, cared, and engaged. So they leave, and that affects results. So they want results. They think emotional intelligence is touchy feely crap, not needed. We just need our people to work hard and efficient, and not nurturing the human or addressing the human side of that worker, that contributor to your results. So it's no, and then that is part of my job, and a challenge as well, that I make sure I polish and be good at, and that is creating buy-in, creating the buy-in of just how important emotional intelligence is, why you need it, why your company needs it, and obviously, and here's how to develop it. So I do want to give, because I didn't answer your question properly with anyone in particular.
Don't worry.
And as you were talking then, I naturally was thinking about those people in my life and I look at various stages and how it's been significant, their advice. And especially when you said some of them are assholes. So I'm going to say he's an asshole, but one of the coaches that I think of when I think of that lack of effective communication, and when it comes to selecting teams and being transparent and being honest and being respectful, he was a coach that tried to be liked more than respected, and it ended up backfiring, and it didn't create a good culture. That same coach was a coach that gave me probably one of the best pieces of advice in my career, in my life, in fact, not just career. And that was very simply, control the controllables. I had a tendency as a young man, and still do, talk about conditioning. It rears its head from time to time. But I know a lot of people can relate to this, how often we ruminate, we stress, we become anxious over things out of our control. And it's a big part of Roman Stoic philosophy that I subscribe to, that I love, that I'm often using in my coaching practices. But that is when you're feeling overwhelmed. And at the time, I was a young man, I was only 20 years of age, and he gave me this advice. And here I am, decades later, still talking about it. So obviously it had that impact. So control the controllables. It can just, that phrase itself can just shift my mindset from being stuck to moving forward. There's many people in my life, but obviously Sean Lipman, we talked about, and I have to just give him a shout out again, because he has been instrumental in this next phase with where am I? I'm in LA. What am I doing? And then brought me in, took a punt on me, cared enough about me as a person and wanting to help, because that's in his nature as well, with no gain of his own, gave me that chance to become a corporate leadership coach. And there's many others. And when it comes to difficult conversations, because we're talking about it, I can tie in another conversation and instrumental human in my life. I went to university with this lad, Jeff Jowett, who strangely enough became a life coach, I guess, after many attempts at and successful businesses and then failed businesses. He used those experiences to go into life coaching, if you will, leadership coaching. And when we were 20 years of age, he approached me at a mutual friend's 21st birthday party when I just got signed in my first rugby contract, feeling pretty good about myself. And he brought me outside at this party and said, mate, do you mind if we have a chat? Sure. It felt a little weird. Like, why is he pointing out? It's freezing out here. Like, what's going on? And he said, mate, I've noticed you've changed a little bit. Like, yeah, you're starting to act a bit big for your boots.
It's really amazing.
Yeah, you're starting to, I don't know, it's just the way you talk. And man, I love that you congrats on everything that's happening in your life, but you're starting to like get a big head. It's basically what he's saying. And that's not you. I know that's not you, and it's noticeable. But the key to that was, because naturally my ego and my defenses, I'm 20 years of age, I'm not emotionally intelligent. And I'm about to throw the drink in his face. Like, and mate, so I miss the old you. So he didn't just come out like all guns blazing, like, mate, you're being an asshole. And maybe because he was just projecting jealousy or whatever, he was coming from the heart and just saying, I don't want you to go further down this road, because I know your true self and your authentic self and your heart. And I'm just having a hard conversation with you now to hopefully correct it and get our relationship back on track. He was 20. And again,
yeah,
here I am talking about it. So the impact it had, clearly, and you know what's funny, Carl? I mentioned that to him, and he can't remember.
Can't remember. Yeah.
So again, to our point, you never know where someone is in their life, how much they might need to hear what's on your mind that can help them. And if you hold back because you feel awkward and uncomfortable having difficult conversations, you might just be depriving somebody of a life-changing piece of advice. So again, amazing. I wanted to give that example as motivation for people who have a tendency to avoid forwarding feedback to people because it feels awkward. You might just be changing someone's life in ways you couldn't fathom.
Yeah. Well, I tell you, from here on forward, that is a new defined term in the academy for someone who pulls someone else aside for a constructive but real conversation to keep them tethered. That's just a fantastic story. I had one last question before we wrap up. The people's career we think of as a high value target. What I mean is that the ability for people to kind of do a lot of damage to themselves about things that relate to career is very, very high, whether it's taking, whatever's happening today, good or bad, too seriously, or catastrophizing and forecasting things forward. What I'm saying is just that's a challenge. And it's particularly a challenge when people are in the midst of a transition of some sort. They're facing uncertainty, et cetera. I'm just wondering, like, the kind of day or the morning after when you had that injury, right? When you realized that, thankfully, you had your feeling back, but that your life would never be the same. Is there any particular thing, like specifically at that time when it really like hurts and there's a lot of uncertainty, that kind of helped you to get through that you could share with people?
Yes. Just trying to see if this is appropriate, but what comes to mind. And is this a family podcast? Is this PG?
We've already moved it into R with high performing non-assholes. So
good. All right. All right, it is. Yeah. So you'll laugh at this. I feel like this is addressing what you're saying, because yes, the catastrophizing, the uncertainty, the anxiety, the worry about the future means that we're not in the present moment.
Right.
So that can be a practice and a reminder straight away, is bring myself back to the present moment and the center, my center, because that's all that exists right now. What's next? What if? What? You're robbing yourself of this moment now of being at peace.
Mm-hmm.
So how do I come back to peace? And from that feeling, that foundation of peace and clarity and our central nervous system being regulated, then that gives us the best chance to seize the day, create what we want to create moving forward.
Mm-hmm.
There's the irony, there's the cycle. And when I woke up, yes, that was going on. Like I'm there in a neck brace and I'm lying horizontal and tubes sticking out of me. I got a catheter stuck in my private parts. Like, it was hectic. And so again, I was having naturally these feelings of like, all right, well, is rugby over? I think it is. Might not be, but if it is, and what if it is? I found myself going to that point. What's next? I remember even thinking the insurance policy that I signed that should protect me and provide me a bit of a financial buffer. Mm-hmm. I signed it so recently. Is that not even going to be in effect? Are they going to try and screw me out of that?
Yeah.
What helped me, whether I was conscious about this or not,
mm-hmm.
I can reflect on it and say, use this as a reminder. What brought me back to the present moment was I was in a private hospital room and I had a bathroom in that room.
Mm-hmm.
And I asked the nurse, oh, can I use the bathroom? They said, absolutely not. You need to stand to do that. We're under strict instructions to keep you in a stabilized position. In fact, when you are sat upright at 90 degrees, then we know it's safe for you to stand on your feet. And when that day comes, maybe you can use the bathroom. You're at 180 degrees right now. We are going to raise the bed 10 degrees per day. So that puts us at around 9 or 10 days before you can stand up. You just broke your neck, okay? You're in hospital. Well, how do I, do number 2? Here's this metal bed pad, right? Crap in that. Now, absolutely not. I refuse to do my business in that. Plus, I was fortunate enough to have, even though we knew each other well, my then girlfriend flew from the UK, bless her, to help, and she was sleeping in my room. So I'm like, even though, we lived together back home, I still don't want to poo in that thing. It was dignity, call it what you will. Sure. Well, what it did was it made me then determined. How long did you say? 9 days? All right, I'm going to turn that into 5. 10 degrees per day, I'm going to enroll you nurses into 15 per day. This was going on in my mind. Talk about the athlete brain kicking in.
Awesome.
15%. And I got them. So what that meant is they came in, they cranked it up, good morning. I'm like, yep. I'm like, you know what? Just a little bit more. Come on. Oh, fine. I feel great, which I did. And then 5 days later, before you know it, I'm sat horizontal. Not horizontal, sorry, 90 degrees. I'm sat up. What's also happening is I'm holding in hospital food, horrible pains in my stomach because of this goal that I've set for myself. But I took it step by step, day by day. And I said to them, look at me, day 5. And they were like, oh yeah, so can I use the bathroom now? And they had to have a little meeting with each other. And they're like, all right, well, we told him 90 degrees and here he is. I don't know how he enrolled us into doing it, but here he is. So they helped me to the toilet and I relieved myself. And then that day, because I'm now standing, they released me from hospital.
I got to tell you, that's got to be the new title of your upcoming book, 15 Degrees a Day.
Yeah. Yeah. Or I will not shit in that.
That could be the subtitle.
So
what a great story.
It came to mind, didn't it? So I guess the moral of that story as it pertains to your question is control the controllables. What I could control was not what's going to happen in the future. That's so far in the future. What's happening right now? I got to get out of here and I refuse to poo in that thing. Let's just take care of that right now.
Yes, I love it. Love it. Marc, how do people get in touch with you? Whether they're individuals wanting one-to-one coaching or companies or teams, where and how can they find you?
Appreciate that, Carl. Thank you for that support. Very easily, my name at LinkedIn. So Marc with a C. I'm sure whatever you're watching now might have my surname, Stcherbina. Look me up. Friend request me on LinkedIn. My email, Marc with a C, again, at winningeq.com. Would love to hear from you. Email me with any questions that you have. We can also create meetings from there and check out the website, as you mentioned before, Carl, winningeq.com. I have a blog on there. I have some good little tidbits and videos and a catalog also of workshops, leadership workshops for you and your company. If that's something you're also looking for, you can check out my library of corporate workshops. So those 3 main platforms.
Awesome. And Marc is super modest, as we talked about, but he literally works with just absolutely top CEOs. And yeah, he's a super, super accomplished guy. So strongly recommend him. Thank you so much, Marc, for your time. And
always
really a pleasure to have you. Thank you.
It's been a lot of fun, Carl. And your questions are just so great, spot on. So thank you. Thank you for allowing me to relive that journey again.
Awesome.